The speed dating session of poster presentations, 3 minutes each, and I'd like to ask Jane Akhurst to go first, and she's going to talk to us about engagement with drug alerts among people who use drugs in Australia. Thanks, Jane.
Great. So, hi. I'm Alice from the New South Wales Users and AIDS Association, or NUA, and I'm joined by Jane Akhurst, a research fellow at ndarc. And I'd like to begin by acknowledging the Bedigal people as the traditional custodians of the land and pay respects to elders past and present. Additionally, working for NUA, a peer-led drug use organisation, it's really important for me to acknowledge the legacy of people who use drugs within research, as well as recognise the contributions of lived experience within this project. Today we're speaking about engagement with drug alerts among people who use drugs in Australia, awareness of, responses to, and preferences for alerts. The project involved a close collaboration between NUA and ndarc to really embed lived experience in the project and ensure results and outputs would actually be of use to people who use drugs themselves, not just experts per se. So drug alerts notify people of high-risk substances circulating in illicit markets, empowering people to make informed choices about their use, as well as promoting harm reduction behaviours. So those are some examples of alerts. We have the one at the front's a NUA alert, and it provides some harm reduction advice about high-dose MDMA. There's a New South Wales Health alert about high-dose MDMA, as well as a Victorian alert on the slide about a counterfeit aprazolam. And although alerts are increasingly being released by health agencies across the country, very little is actually known about that awareness of, responses to, and preferences for these alerts for people who use drugs. So to examine this, we conducted an online survey designed in consultation with people who use drugs, as well as people with expertise in the dissemination and design of alerts themselves. We had 575 participants complete the survey from June to September this year. Respondents were predominantly from the East Coast, residing in either New South Wales, Victoria, or Queensland, and stimulants, particularly methamphetamine, was the most common reported drug used in the past year.
Thank you, Alice. So we asked people perhaps too many questions in this survey, but we asked people about how they engaged with alerts that they had seen in the past. So most people, I think about 3/4, had seen an alert in Australia in the past 5 years, mostly within the past year. And so we asked those people, what did you do in response when you saw or heard about this most recent alert? So among people who said that they had ever used the drug type mentioned in the most recent alert, we asked them, how did that alert impact your behaviour when using that drug type? And you can see, so the 3 blue segments, those are people who said that they changed their behaviour in some way after seeing or hearing about this alert. So whether they stopped using that drug type or engaged with harm reduction behaviours that they hadn't already been engaging with. And then that orange segment, so 44% of people said they didn't change their drug use in response to that alert. Just noting that we asked those people why not, what was going on, and around 1 in 2 said that they already used harm reduction behaviours. And finally, we asked people what they thought about alerts in general and their preferences for risk communication around drugs in the future. And quite interestingly, one of our questions was, do you just want to see specific alerts for high-risk drugs, or are you interested in more broad updates of things like monthly trends of purity for drugs in your area? And you can see from this pie chart that most people wanted to receive those broad updates either just by themselves or in combination with existing alerts. Head to our poster to find out more.
So, Olivia Price. Thanks, Olivia. Olivia is going to talk to us about sexual behaviour and sexually transmitted infections among people who inject drugs.
It is well known that tobacco cigarettes contain nicotine and other constituents that are harmful in pregnancy. E-cigarettes too can contain nicotine and harmful constituents. However, there is a gap in knowledge regarding their safety in pregnancy and effect on birth outcomes. With e-cigarettes becoming more popular in recent years, it is vital to evaluate the risk of exposing harmful constituents from e-cigarettes to a fetus through a pregnancy. This is especially considering the 30% rate of unplanned pregnancies. We can do this by quantifying the prevalence of regular e-cigarette use in people who have the potential to become pregnant, i.e. females aged 14 to 44. It's also important to identify prevalences in different age subgroups due to age-related variation in fertility. It's also useful to identify motivations behind the use of e-cigarettes. Most existing literature analyses current e-cigarette use, which includes at least monthly. However, our focus is regular e-cigarette use, which includes at least weekly, as this may pose more of a risk on pregnancy. We analysed data from the 2019 National Drug Strategy Household Survey. Our main findings concluded that in 2019, regular e-cigarette use was relatively low overall. There was minimal variation between different age subgroups. This is encouraging given the higher rate of pregnancy in the 25 to 34 age group. I've also presented the regular tobacco cigarette use and current e-cigarette use in the whole age group, just for context. So compared with regular tobacco smoking use, regular e-cigarette use remained a much lower prevalence. And compared with males, regular e-cigarette use in females also had a lower prevalence. In 2019, there was a higher proportion of females than males that used e-cigarettes constructively to quit or prevent relapse of tobacco smoking. This is perhaps a more tolerable use of cigarettes. Additionally, of these females, 50% used other smoking cessation strategies to help quit smoking. Given the low rates of regular e-cigarette use and the high proportion of people reporting constructive use for e-cigarettes, this might be considered a more tolerable risk for using e-cigarettes. In the future, it would be ideal to use updated data to evaluate the prevalences and motivations of regular e-cigarette use to better reflect the current Australian e-cigarette use landscape, as well as looking into the safety of e-cigarettes in general and in pregnancy. Thank you.
Okay, sorry for the delayed start. I'm going to be presenting the results from our systematic review on sexual behaviour and sexually transmitted infections among people who inject drugs. And you'll see that I'm presenting on on behalf of quite a large list of co-authors, so I just want to acknowledge the team effort that this review was. So globally, the incidence of sexually transmitted infections, or STIs, is increasing. And there's evidence to suggest that people who inject drugs might be disproportionately burdened. This is attributed to multi-level socio-structural factors that may increase reliance on transactional sex or sex work and also limit access to health services like STI testing and treatment. However, there's been no efforts to synthesize the data that we have available. So to address this research gap, we conducted a multi-stage systematic review to synthesize data on sexual behaviours, STI testing uptake, and the prevalence of STIs among people who inject drugs. And where there was sufficient data, we used random effects meta-analysis to pull multiple estimates from the same country, and then generated regional and global estimates weighted by population size of people who inject drugs. So for the results, in terms of sexual behaviours among people who inject drugs, globally we estimate that 14.9%, or approximately 1 in 6, reported recent, so recent being in the past year, sex work, and approximately 1 in 5 reported recent sex with a casual partner without a condom. In terms of STI testing, we estimate that approximately 1 in 4 reported past year STI testing, although data for this data point were quite sparse. And then we estimate that the global prevalence of syphilis among people who inject drugs is 4.4%, which is higher than the general population, but lower than men who have sex with men, who are a recognised priority group for syphilis. And there was quite substantial regional variation in this estimate, ranging from 1% in Western Europe to 12% in South Asia. And data were particularly sparse for other diseases, which precluded meta-analysis. So the takeaway messages from this review is that sexually transmitted infections appear to be a neglected area in research that includes people who inject drugs, which was evident by sparse data of STI testing uptake and the prevalence for diseases other than syphilis. We provide the first global estimate for syphilis prevalence among people who inject drugs, which may serve as a baseline for monitoring disease burden as the WHO aims to reduce the global incidence of syphilis by 90% before 2030. And finally, integration of sexual health services within other services that serve people who inject drugs is essential to improve testing uptake and linkage to treatment among this population to mitigate transmission among people who inject drugs and their sexual partners. Thank you.
So, last but not least, Baillee. Is going to talk to us about Kicked Out, the lived experiences of Sydney's nightlife eviction policies.
Hi everyone, I do not have slides. My entire thesis is words and I didn't want to put more words on top of words. So, patron eviction was introduced as a legal requirement to address alcohol-related intoxication in licensed environments. Beyond this legal framework, the enactment of eviction exists at the interface of formal and informal regulatory policy, I haven't had much sleep, and decision-making by regulatory actors. In my research, I apply actor network theory as a relational approach and foreground pleasure to trace the human and non-human actors that shape how eviction unfolds. I conducted 28 qualitative interviews with patrons who were evicted from nightlife venues in Sydney, and I aim to explore the outcomes of Sydney's nightlife eviction policies by investigating A, patron experiences of eviction while using different substances, and B, how the harms and pleasures of a night out are mediated by eviction, substances, and other actors across nightlife. Two key themes that I've identified through preliminary analysis are how eviction enactments can produce harm and how the powers to punish of regulatory actors play out in a nightlife setting. Further findings are presented in my poster. So, for example, Nathan's experience when he was accused of vaping inside a venue demonstrates how eviction can lead to or produce harms. Quote, "None of us vape at all, but the security didn't want to hear it at all. My girlfriend was really frustrated because we got kicked out, and that caused us to have a bit of a disagreement. Her and her friend went one way, and I was like, whatever, I'm just going to go home. I'm walking home by myself. I ended up getting attacked by a bunch of guys." Participant experiences also highlighted the power imbalance between patrons and security and the effects of what Claire Farmer has described as the powers to punish afforded to security by regulatory policy. For example, Jack was blackmailed by security when caught snorting ketamine in the bathrooms of a club. Security first requested that he and his friends handed the drugs over to them, or the police would be called, but then changed their tune and instructed the boys to, quote, "keep the drugs but open your wallets." Jack was shocked and confused as security took the money in their wallets, saying, "They were security guards. They had the uniform. I think that's pretty corrupt. It was such a raw experience." The powers to punish afforded to security were also reflected in Kristen's eviction after she stood up to 3 security guards who were sexually harassing her in a club. Quote, "I was yelling back, 'Don't touch me.' And then obviously they were just like, 'No, kick her out. She's too drunk.' Kristen was angry and disgusted, commenting that with the power security guards have in club settings, there's nothing I can really do about it." The lived experiences of Sydney's nightlife eviction policies draw attention to the ways in which current policy and practice may increase rather than reduce harms. This is the first major study specifically looking at the enactment of eviction as a regulatory practice, with significant implications for public health and harm reduction. The actor network theory approach enables us to see these complex interactions and experiences as entangled and highlights the broad ecosystem that eviction policies take part in. Thank you.
Thank you, Jane, Olivia, Bethany and Baillee for those rich and interesting and very efficiently presented findings. Will you join with me in thanking these great young colleagues who are the future of our sector?